And
can
Matt
cut
has
that
a
one out.
very, very high-pitched, irritating, scratchy voice.
Pat does?
No, Matt
Oh,
does.
sorry. Can we scratch all of this? This is all just got edited out.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, Pat. Sorry, Matt.
Welcome once again to Free Associations from the Boston University School of Public Health, the Public Health and Medical Journal Club podcast for anyone who is as confused by the latest health study as I am.
Wait for it.
By why people drink kombucha.
Oh, I have no idea. Why?
What is that all about?
Why don't you explain what kombucha is?
I have no idea what it is.
Some
It's
people may not know what it
It's
is.
like fermented green tea mixed with stuff, right?
I had it. I don't get it. I don't know why people think it's really wonderful. I'm just trying to understand, but I don't get it. Anyway, I am Matt Fox from the
What
Department
about
of
apple
Epidemiology.
cider vinegar?
That's fine. I'll drink that. That sounds
People
good.
actually drink that?
Yeah, my daughter's way into it now. She drinks it
Pour
with
it
everything.
into a glass and you just
She
drink it,
mixes
or you
with
cook
water.
with it?
She mixes it with water and drinks it.
Oh, hang on. I thought you were kidding.
No,
I'm not drinking that
It's a
either.
thing.
Really?
Yeah, she claims it cures everything,
Everything?
pretty much,
Wow.
except
Yeah,
attitude, apparently.
And how does her doctor father feel about that?
Yeah, could be placebo effect. I'm wondering.
Anyway, I'm Matt Fox from the Departments of Epidemiology and Global Health at the BU School of Public Health, and I am here as always with Chris Gill and Don Thea
Hey, Matt.
Hello.
from the Departments of Global Health at the BU School of Public Health as well. As always, we are here in the Godly Studio, except I'm not in the Godly Studio. I'm
You
in
are,
Berlin.
because you're back from Berlin.
No, I'm in Berlin, which means somehow I must have been
for
here.
a long time.
No,
I
about
must
2
have
weeks
been
ago,
here for
Matt.
what, 2.5 weeks? It
No,
feels
you're
like.
back. You're back now.
No, I'm not. It's amazing. I've just been here for weeks in this hotel. They won't let me out.
What
Have you
era?
tried turning the doorknob?
Do you think the audience finds this at all amusing that we do this all the
I
time?
think we're totally
I think
self-indulgent.
we should actually explain that we record 2 episodes at one time. And so we are constantly making jokes about
Don't
the
tell
fact
the
that it's
secrets.
2 weeks later, when in fact it is a few minutes later.
Time
It's funny
shifting
to us.
jokes.
It's funny to us. It's not funny to you.
Right.
Anyway, as a reminder, we would love it if you would head over to the Population Health Exchange website, which is BU's hub for lifelong learning, where you can find all kinds of interesting public health stuff, I'm just going to say. But most importantly, well, I suppose that's important too, but most importantly, go over to iTunes and Stitcher and wherever you get your podcasts and rate us, because I want to let you guys know, as of June 26th, since June 26th, we have 2 new reviews.
Really?
Yes, so I'm going to read them
Oh,
to you.
wow.
First one is from Keeping Sharp, who says, I have just been accepted. Oh, no, it says Keeping Sharp is the title. Sorry. I have just been accepted as a PhD student in a related field, but I already started listening to this podcast before I applied. Not only did it help me get thinking like an epidemiologist, but it really made me want to join their ranks. I even thought about applying to the Boston University. I got in somewhere else first, but I look forward to learning at a distance from these free associations, which I liked. Nice.
So we're giving
And
it away
then-
free, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's a
And
good
then the
business
second
model.
the second one was titled Always a Good Time. And it says, humor and knowledge, true epi insights, distilled herein, drink some truth. So is that a haiku, Chris?
I think it is.
Drink
humor
some
and
truth?
knowledge, drink some truth. Yeah, humor
With
and knowledge, true epi insights,
Yep.
distilled herein, drink some truth.
That's it.
Yes.
Bravo.
So now on to the show. So today in our first segment, which is our Journal Club segment, we are going to look at a study about a new drug to treat sickle cell disease. And then in the second part of the podcast, which is our deep dive, we're going to talk about the first 2 registered reports that were published in Nature Human Behavior. And then in our Amazing and Amusing, we are going to dig into some things that make us laugh out loud, or Don will tell us why we all look like our dogs. Okay, so segment 1. So we're going to talk about an article that looked at a new drug to treat sickle cell disease, and it was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. That was titled A Phase 3 Randomized Trials of, oh, help me, Voxelotor?
Voxelotor.
A Phase 3 trial of Voxelotor in sickle cell disease by first author. Should I do that again?
No, that's good. Keep going.
Excellent.
You're totally fine with that? I pronounced it vaguely correctly?
You pronounced it exactly right, especially with the echo effect.
Right. Good emphasis.
A Phase 3 randomized trial of Voxelotor in sickle cell disease by first author Elliot Vichinsky of UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. So here are some of the headlines for this one. New sickle cell drug improves hemoglobin characteristics, says MedPage Today.
That's pretty straightforward. That's right on.
Yep. Novel drug could be disease modifying in sickle cell disease.
That's true, but unhelpful.
True.
That's Medscape. And Voxelotor improves hemoglobin levels in sickle cell disease.
Well, absolutely.
Straightforward.
Yeah, I love it.
Three good
So
quotes.
that was Physicians Briefing. Now, here's the thing about that, though. Listen to the three that I gave you. MedPage Today, Medscape, and Physicians Briefing. Why did I give you those three and not the New York Times?
What did Fox News say?
Yeah, exactly. This study didn't get a lot of press.
Right.
And I was pretty surprised by that, and I want to come back to this. Why didn't this study get more press? All right, so Don, before we get into why it didn't get more press, can you tell us what it was about and what they found?
Sure. I think it's sickle cell disease. I think most people are somewhat vaguely familiar with the whole concept, but essentially it's an inborn error. It's a genetic abnormality where people are born with one amino acid substitution in the hemoglobin gene, and so the hemoglobin that's produced is slightly different in these individuals, but different enough so that the many molecules of hemoglobin in a red blood cell tend to crystallize when there are states of slightly lower oxygenation. And what happens is that the red blood cells, which kind of look like a lozenge, collapse, and then they form a sickle. And those sickles result in all of the clinical manifestations, which can be very severe, very painful episodes, and they can produce end organ damage. And it's a very, very serious disease, which actually results in hemolysis and anemia, vaso-occlusion events, and reduces life expectancy by 30 years. I didn't realize that.
Unbelievable. I didn't know
that.
that.
Huge.
Absolutely deadly disease.
That's just huge. And so there's about 100,000 people with sickle cell anemia in the United States. And this molecule is sort of a first in its class. Is a molecule that attaches to that hemoglobin molecule and changes the conformation of that hemoglobin molecule just slightly enough so that it prevents this cascade of crystallization of the hemoglobin molecules and prevents that lozenge-like cell from collapsing into a sickle. So it's a medicine that needs to be taken on a daily basis because it's metabolized, and you need to make sure that you have a certain amount of it in the blood to be able to affect these red blood cells and prevent them from deforming. So this is an industry-sponsored Phase 3 international multi-center placebo RCT. And I checked all of the authors, and none of the authors are employed by the sponsor, but they did say, and they maintain that the authors wrote the drafts, but they did say that all drafts were prepared by authors with writing assistance from a medical writer funded by the sponsor, where my yellow flag went up with that. Nonetheless, it seems like it's a well done study. So the participants were 12 to 65 years of age with confirmed sickle cell disease. They had to have a hemoglobin that was sort of in the normal range. Well, it's not normal range, but it wasn't highly abnormal. So it was between 5.5 and 10.5 grams per deciliter. Between 1 to 10 vaso-occlusive events in the past year. And they could be receiving the only alternative drug, actually there are two, but it's the most common alternative drug called hydroxyurea, which is a drug that has a similar effect, but a completely different mechanism of action, and is not really that effective. If the individual was transfusion dependent, because their anemia was so bad that they required multiple transfusions, or they were hospitalized in the last 60 days for a specific crisis, they were excluded. So it's sort of tended to exclude the people with more severe disease. And there were three groups. One was a high dose, which was 1,500 milligrams of Voxelotor, and 900 milligrams, which was the median group, and then a placebo group. There were 3 periods during the trial. One was a screening period, which consisted of the first month. I think it was prior to taking the medication. And then there was a treatment period, which was 72 weeks. And then there was an end visit some period of time after the last dose. In the analysis, they stratified by hydroxyurea, yes or no, as well as the region of where the study was being done. And there were multiple sites in North America, Europe, and a bunch of other sites. The endpoints were the percent of individuals with a hemoglobin response that was defined as an increase of 1 gram per deciliter from baseline to 24 weeks on treatment. And then they had secondary endpoints, which were essentially other biologic measures of improvement in the anemia. So it was the amount of indirect bilirubin, the amount of reticulocytes, and reticulocytes are red blood cells that can be stained in a special way to indicate that they're really young. They're new red blood cells. The percent of reticulocytes, and then LDH, which is a molecule that is elevated in the presence of hemolysis. So the individuals were assessed clinically every 2 weeks for 8 weeks, and then every 4 weeks through 24 weeks, and then after that every 3 months. They also took blood levels of the medication and looked at the percent of hemoglobin that was bound by the drug. And that was important just to correlate the fact that whatever they saw on the endpoint was in fact associated with a measurable amount of the drug associated with the hemoglobin. The analysis was intention to treat. And the comparison was baseline versus 24 weeks, as I mentioned. This study ran from January of 2017 to May 2018. And they screened about 500 individuals, and they came up with 274 participants across 60 institutions in 12 countries. There were 90 individuals in the high drug group, 92 in the medium drug group, and 92 in the placebo group. Table 1 indicated that there were some slight imbalances. The high drug group had more white individuals, and there was more hemoglobin S disease in the placebo. And a sickle cell disease is not completely uniform because there are a few other alterations in the hemoglobin that can result in the same disease, but it's not pure 1 amino acid substitution that I mentioned before. So approximately 2/3 were taking hydroxyurea. The median follow-up was 42 weeks for the high group, 38 weeks for the medium group, and 37 weeks for the placebo group. And when they did the intention to treat analysis, there was a fairly marked response in the hemoglobin at 24 weeks. So 51% of the individuals in the high drug group had a positive response, i.e. 1 gram or more per deciliter increase in the hemoglobin, as opposed to 33% in the medium group and 7% in the placebo
Really
group.
profoundly different.
Yeah, very, very different. And when the per protocol analysis was 1.3 grams per deciliter increase versus 0.7 versus a 0% increase at 24 weeks. They confirmed that there was high, what they call hemoglobin occupancy, which is really a measure of how many of those hemoglobin molecules have the drug actually attached to it and seemingly doing its thing. There was 26% had hemoglobin associated, drug associated with the hemoglobin in the high group, and 17% in the medium group. All of the secondary markers of hemolysis were similarly improved, so it's sort of a consistent story in terms of what's going on. And they also measured a hormone called erythropoietin, which was the same in all 3 groups, which is important because what the authors state is that, in fact, if you might be changing the ability of the hemoglobin molecule to let go of oxygen, in essence, in the tissue, and that could be a bad effect. So if the oxygen is attached to the hemoglobin molecule more avidly as a result of this medication, it might not let go of the oxygen where it is needed, and that could have some bad effects. And the measure of that is that if, in fact, it wasn't being let go where it was needed in the bone marrow, erythropoietin would go up. And they showed that erythropoietin didn't go up. So that is sort of
quasi-reassuring.
Quasi-reassuring in terms of it's not changing the mechanics or the hemoglobin dissociation curve. There was no difference in the number of sickle cell crises across the different groups. But the authors state that might in fact be something that wouldn't be seen at 24 weeks and could potentially be seen with the analysis that's going to be done at 72 weeks.
And in fact, they offered a somewhat convoluted argument around that point, which was that when you increase the hemoglobin, you will increase the blood viscosity. And if you increase the blood viscosity, you might increase the rate of crises.
Yeah.
And so they were arguing that, even though the crises didn't go down, perhaps it was sort of like you're having fewer crises because of the vexellator affecting the polymerization, but at the same time, your creating more crises because you're increasing the viscosity of the blood, and then therefore the two cancel each other out. I mean, I thought this was a bit of a stretch of an argument, but
very speculative.
They did kind of ponder about that point.
They also reported the adverse events that were not related to sickle cell disease, and they were high in all three groups, in the high drug group, the medium drug group, and in the placebo. And I don't really understand why that was. I mean, it was really quite high in the placebo group, but if they determined that these were in fact not as a result of the sickle cell disease, why would it be the same in all three groups?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question.
Maybe just because all three groups are quite sick. It's a severe illness.
Well, I don't know
and maybe
how they determined that. They gave us a list of what those adverse events were, and it's myalgias and headaches and things.
Yeah.
They didn't really explain how they determined actually that those adverse events were not associated with sickle disease, because sickle disease has protein effects because
absolutely.
it affects essentially all the organs in the
And
body.
you would feel achy and have myalgias and sickle cell disease
So I didn't quite get that.
Yeah, I was
fair enough,
skeptical too.
Okay. So the reason why we wanted to do this one was because this is obviously it's a really severe disease, and as far as I know, there haven't been a much in the way of breakthroughs for what is quite a severe condition in a long time. And based on our read of the abstract, I mean, this seems to be a really big effect, quite a breakthrough. Mm-hmm. And so I'm struggling with why, Chris, when you give us your take on this, also give us your sense for why didn't this get more press? Is there something that I'm they're missing in terms of the quality of their study, or what do we think's going on here?
I'm going to guess I don't know, because I felt much as you did, Matthew, that this felt like probably a game changer. Like, this is the first new compound for sickle cell disease in an ever so long time. The drug seemed safe. It was efficacious. It could be combined with hydroxyurea. It has a total novel mechanism of action that allows it to be combined potentially synergistically with other treatments. I mean, this is a very, very big deal. And there are a lot of people with sickle cell disease. So I would have thought that the sickle cell advocacy groups would have been like making a lot of noise about this. And so I'm curious, did that not, when you were looking at the press releases, you're kind of hinting that there was more to that story than we saw, because the three that you cited are all kind of like, whatever groups. Sorry, Medline, WebMD or whatever it is, but like you said, what happened to the New York Times on this one? Why?
No, I'm not trying to hint at anything more than just that. If I go by, again, I could be missing things, but the way that I go about finding the headlines is I go to the page for the journal article, and then I hit the little JavaScript app that Altmetric has created, and Altmetric is supposed to be picking up, all the articles all the news articles and tweets and other forms of communication that talk about a particular article, and there just wasn't a lot, and I it's just struck me as a little bit weird.
It's funny too, because around the same time, relatively recently, I think that there was a fair amount of press about the first, in essence, transplantation of a stem cell where they had used molecular methods to actually change that incorrect amino acid into a correct amino acid.
And there was a lot of hoo-ha about that.
And they infused that back into a young woman, and she and everybody's very, very hopeful about that, because that is a definitive cure, as opposed to this, which is
a treatment,
a treatment, but that would require lifelong treatment,
like
but
it doesn't require a stem cell transplant, which is
right. So it would be
super expensive,
a lot cheaper,
safer.
and safer, and much less trouble.
If I could, pile in here on what I thought the paper did and did not show. Obviously using hemoglobin is a very sensitive endpoint and pretty unambiguous, and it really ties closely with what the drug is supposed to do. So I understand that, but nonetheless, I felt so dissatisfied by what else they measured, because I want to know, as a doctor, right? Does this make my patient feel better?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't talk about quality of life at all.
I thought that was weird too.
Or function.
Yeah, I thought that was weird.
Wouldn't you think like the point of raising your hemoglobin is to increase your energy levels and your ability to do your activities of daily living? They didn't talk about that at all. Why not? I mean, isn't that really the bottom line? I mean, in some sense, who cares if the hemoglobin is 1 gram per decimiliter higher on average? You know, don't you want to know that that translates into, I feel better and I can do more?
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, why did they do they designed the study to follow these people up for 72 weeks. Why did they do an analysis at 24 weeks before they even finished the period of observation at 72 weeks when they could have made probably better observations, not only in terms of hemoglobin and anemia and the rest of that stuff, and leaving aside your point, Chris, about quality of life, but the thing that I'd want to know about is, are these major, occlusive events happening less often, and are they having less pain? Are they having less infarcts of their kidneys and fewer strokes and all the rest of that, which may require a much longer period of observation? But certainly, you have a chance of seeing more of those really important endpoints if you're going to report the findings at 72 weeks as opposed to 24 weeks. Yeah. Why even do this analysis at 24 weeks?
Yeah, especially when you look at their figure, looking at the impact on the hemoglobin over time.
Yeah.
I know our listeners can't see it, but the benefit of the 1,500 milligram voxelotor or the 900 milligram voxelotor, this is figure 2, is accrued within the first 2 weeks of starting the drug. And then there is really no suggestion that you have a continued increase in the hemoglobin over time. It's like all the benefit happens immediately. Now that's
within 2 weeks.
Which is very interesting. So it's not like it decreases your hemolysis rate, but it does it immediately. And then it seems to me to achieve a new steady state of hemolysis, but you don't continue to gain over time. You reach a slightly higher hemoglobin concentration, and there you stay. Now, that could all be explained by the pharmacokinetics of this drug, which reversibly bind to the oxygenated hemoglobin, which means that it can disassociate from the oxygenated hemoglobin. And so maybe this is all about pharmacokinetics. But if that's true, then you start to wonder, well, doesn't that mean there's a whole range of other questions related to the optimal use of this drug? Like 1,500 milligrams once a day, big spike, it goes down. What's the half-life of this drug? We never learned that. But maybe, what about 1,000 milligrams twice a day instead of 1,500 milligrams once a day? Or 1,500 milligrams twice a day? Because the side effect profile of 1,500 versus 900 was pretty similar. So maybe they can push the dose and give more doses. And if they did that, maybe they could get up to, 2 or 3 milligrams of hemoglobin, and they could really make the drug sing.
Yeah. So I struggled with this paper a bit, not in the sense that I didn't, know what they did or think that they did, roughly an appropriate kind of design study, but I struggled with it partly because this is difficult for me. I mean, I don't know this field at all, and it's it's something that I struggle to understand even the terminology for. And as you guys know, I always, before I read the study, I write down what my prior is, and for this one I wrote down
no idea,
nada, no idea. I guess skepticism, because I'm always skeptical of new drugs and big game changers. But what the heck do I know anyway? But I am going back to this. I am curious about the outcome. I mean, so when I looked at this outcome, my first question was, is this the right outcome, or is this a surrogate outcome?
Yeah, it's a surrogate.
And I don't know the answer to that. Is this a surrogate outcome?
To a certain extent. Anemia is a really important part of the symptomatology for sickle cell disease and can be very debilitating itself. But the hit on life expectancy is not from anemia. It's really from these red blood cells sickling and then clogging the arteries and then preventing the blood flow to a certain part of the brain or the kidney, or, and that's what produces the crises. So we don't know whether, in fact, the percent of sickled cells is changed in this. The only thing we know are these, as you said, surrogate markers, and
Yes.
that's the really important thing that I want to know is are those infarcts and those life-threatening events diminished in any way? And we're not given that information.
And what would be the consequences of pushing the dose? Because, like you said, this drug stabilizes the oxygenated state. So does that mean that oxygen is less likely to be released by the hemoglobin molecule, which makes it mean that you're not delivering oxygen to the tissues because it's being glued on by the voxelotor molecule?
Well, they're trying to convince us that the erythropoietin levels are saying the opposite. That they're saying that there's adequate oxygen being delivered to the bone marrow.
Right. But in fact, that's how the drug seems to work. They were concerned about that.
Right.
So I don't know. I just feel like there's a long way to go on this before we could. I mean, I in my notes, I wrote game changer ?
Yeah.
Because at the end, I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And that is so. That's why I started to wonder: is that the reason why I didn't get as much press? Because maybe it's not as big a game changer as I originally thought it was when I read the abstract. That maybe it's a really it's a really positive sign and it's going in the right direction, but it's too early to say. And certainly we've seen things that looked really promising before turn out to not be as promising further down the line. Just to go back to a point raised earlier, Don, you had said why do this analysis at 24 weeks when they were following them up for 72 weeks? And I actually had the same question. I don't know the answer, but I did wonder, they had these stopping rules built into the study, and the effect is so large that you could see this would have been the kind of study that would have been stopped early for benefit.
But don't you think they would have told us that?
Exactly. I don't see anything that says that, so I don't know. But the question here, so there were 200 and how many?
274, I think.
74 patients in the study for a 3-arm trial. So that's not a lot of people in your study. And yet you only need 274, presumably because you had such large effects. Now the question is, what was the study powered? What kind of difference was the study powered to detect?
Mm-hmm. Did they tell us that? I don't remember them telling us that.
They didn't.
They didn't tell us that.
That is why you didn't report it. There is no
power calculation.
There is no sample size justification here, and it just made me really curious. I mean, obviously, I say that. I mean, they published their protocol, so I'm sure it's in there, and I didn't go and read it. But it did strike me as strange not to see that in there, and that the journal didn't ask for it. Seemed weird.
I am surprised that the New England Journal would not spot that. That's a pretty obvious one.
Unless I just missed it, but then we all missed it, and you didn't say anything.
I didn't see it either. I just looked again.
Yeah. So one other thing, which is that I never used to do this, but I have to say, since starting this podcast with you guys, it has become now standard practice for me to first, as you did, Don, go and look at the author's conflicts of interest and the funding. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I see industry, the term you used was a yellow flag, and I think that was exactly the right term. It's not a red flag,
right?
But it's definitely a from everything that we know, whether intentionally or even unintentionally, you can be influenced by funding, in particular when it's industry funding, when there's a product to be sold. And that just sort of dampens my enthusiasm just a little bit. Now, this is a huge effect. So if it pans out, that's, I'm not saying here that I don't believe anything is going on. But again, it's just one more level of why I want to see more data.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I thought was curious was sort of along the lines of what you were saying, Matt, about how the number of people in each group was relatively small, but the study accrued the subjects across 60 institutions in 12 countries. It seems to me that seems excessive, given the prevalence of this disease in urban African American populations in the United States and other places. It seems to me that you could probably have accrued that number of individuals in one or two sites, in an urban medical practice or in an urban setting. I don't know why they had to do
spread
60,
it so wide.
Yeah, spread it so wide. So each institution, is enrolling 9 or 10 subjects. It just didn't make sense to me.
I agree. I will have to say, though, we have reviewed several studies before that have been like that. But I agree with you.
Well, that's for very rare, very sort of rare diseases. This is not such a rare disease, especially in the the African American population.
Yep.
All right. Any last points before I take the last word?
No,
Chris?
Go ahead.
Chris?
Yeah.
What is a phase 1/2 trial?
I have no idea.
They
heard of that before. What is that?
I have no idea. They referred to their earlier
a phase 1/2 trial.
Oh, is that what it is?
I think it's not a half. It's a 1/2.
Oh, that would make so much more sense. Well, there you go. I'm showing off my ignorance.
I reckon it's a phase 1/2 trial. And what I don't know what they're referring to, but sometimes they have adaptive designs where you have a phase 1 trial that goes straight into a phase 2 trial without becoming a new cohort.
Okay, so it does. It says in a phase 1/2, which I read as 1/2.
No, I think it's a 1/2 trial.
Oh, good. Okay, I didn't know that was such a thing.
It's kind of the knockout punch of clinical development.
So two other things. One is that this had the shortest discussion section I have ever read. And as you guys know, I don't like discussion sections, so I was thrilled. I didn't count how long it was, but if you look at it, this was a really short discussion section.
5 paragraphs.
And because of that, it contained no limitation section, which by the way, I said about the last one, the one that we did last week or 2 weeks ago, which I still stand by the statement.
That was the one when you were in Germany.
Yeah, that was back a couple weeks ago, back when you were in France.
Were you in France, Chris?
Well, 6 weeks ago.
Really?
That one, it's not that it had no limitations, it's that their limitations were almost entire about generalizability, which I don't like in limitation sections, so I misspoke on that one. But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so in our second segment, we want to talk about an article that was published in Nature Human Behavior. An article, it was a more of a commentary. It was called What Science Looks Like, and it was a story about their first 2 registered reports. And this is something that we have talked about in a number of different episodes on this podcast, and I have expressed as an idea that I'm quite interested in.
Take us back to the beginning here.
Oh, I'll take you way back, all the way.
Way back.
Okay, so time travel noise.
Excellent. So we've talked a lot about the replication crisis that's been going on, particularly in the psychological sciences, and but it certainly applies to us in epi. And you have these studies, these sort of big name studies that now have been replicated and have failed to replicate. And so trying to figure out what to do about this. And one of the solutions that was proposed is the idea of registered reports. Now, registered reports builds on the idea of pre-registration. Pre-registration meaning if I'm going to do a study, then I should, have in a registry somewhere my protocol for what I'm going to do, including my analysis plan for how I'm going to analyze the data so that I don't then get into the situation where I can just change the analysis until I get the results that I want. And this is I don't know if I would say it's taken off, but it's become much more of a thing in the psychological sciences. Of course, we have this already in the world of clinical trials for epi, not so much for observational studies, but even in clinical trials. I mean, it's not like the clinical trial registers require you to pre-register your analysis plan. So it's not entirely clear. Although with a clinical trial, the analysis plan is usually quite simple, so probably not a big thing. Anyway. Registered Reports takes this a step forward and says, what if journals actually have people write up their methods and their question and submit it to the journal before they ever do the study? And then the journal can look at the description of the problem that they're trying to solve and the methods that they're going to use to solve it, and decide whether or not that if the authors can do what they say they're going to do, whether or not they will publish it. And if they agree to publish it, then if the authors do what they said they were going to do, they publish it whether or not it shows anything interesting. In other words, it could be a null finding. And that is what this journal did. And they have now had their first 2 papers published, which were registered reports. So 2 papers that the journal agreed ahead of time were interesting questions and the methodology could answer the question, but the journal deciding, I think through peer review though. And these first 2 published registered reports, the first one found a null effect and one found a counterintuitive effect, meaning it sort of disproved what they thought they were going to find kind of study. So their take on this is essentially a success, right? We are getting null findings published, even if because we think the question is interesting, not because we think the result is interesting, and that it gives more an opportunity to decide that we're going to publish something before we actually know what the result is. So as you guys know, I'm really interested in this idea. I don't know that I'm totally signed on to it, but I think it's quite interesting. But I do wonder, where this is all heading, right? Is this a flavor of the month thing that people are going to kind of get tired of? Is this going to become something that only, niche journals do? And is it sustainable? I mean, this obviously requires some upfront work that people have to do in order to get their question accepted.
Right. But you made the point last time when we discussed the concept that actually the amount of reviewer work is not that much different, right? Because if you agree on all the nitty gritty in terms of the protocol and the analysis plan up front, then really all you're doing is looking at the results of that executed analysis plan.
I do agree with that. Yep. I suppose it requires a little bit of authors upfront time. So it's not that I don't think that it will require more time of authors. It requires more time upfront as opposed to doing it when doing the writing and the conceptualizing and the selling of your idea, selling in quotes, before you've done the study. And I wonder whether, again, is this a huge leap forward or is this a baby step? I'm not sure yet. What do you guys think?
Well, let's go back to the future. So I'm going to take us back to the future. Hold on a second. Here we go.
Okay. All right. What? Wait, before you say anything, Don?
Yeah. Do I have a similar soundtrack? No.
No. It's not that. It's that while I was explaining that whole thing, I thought that my computer had frozen because you did not move.
I just took a little nap, Matt.
I stunned him.
I took a little nap.
My phaser device.
Sorry. Chris, go ahead.
Nick can mute the mic so you don't hear my snoring.
I don't know. I thought that the title of that editorial was a little bit self-satisfied. Like what science looks like. Like, hey guys, pay attention to us. This is the real deal. But on one level, I was like, they're right. This is a better way to do it. It takes away all those perverse incentives around publication bias and like needing to p-hack your way into fame. So I thought it was right. And the fact that these two papers came back, one is a null finding, one is like the opposite of what they thought their hypothesis was going to, their hypothesis was poetically ironic. And it just like, it totally fit the narrative of like, we have a publication bias crisis in science. And we believe this is a big problem and that, null findings are being systematically excluded and that counterintuitive findings are being ignored in many cases because they don't they conflict with the principal investigators' preconceived hypotheses and therefore damages their ego. If you believe that was true, this is a perfect demonstration of that fear. Realized and the solution also demonstrated. I actually really liked it. I thought that they had some bragging rights on this one.
I think it has the staying power of a hothouse orchid.
You have to explain that one because I'm not sure about those hothouse orchids. Is this a metaphor?
I don't think that this is gonna play out. I think that this is a niche effort, though I agree with it, though I think it's elegant, though I think it's something that if applied widely, it could be a good idea, but I just don't see it happening. And because I think that the industry doesn't work this way. And I think that it's gotten to the point where it's almost impossible not to get a paper published, regardless of the quality of the paper. And I think that if people submit their idea with everything spelled out and all the rigor implied to one or two journals and they get rejected, they'll go to the next tier journal and they will get accepted. Yeah. And, the only way that this can be successful is if it is universally adopted. And I just don't see that happening.
Yeah. So maybe, and I see what I take your point, but the other way it could work is if certain journals decided to adopt this and those became seen as the prestigious journals because of that. People would say, if I'm looking at your packet for promotion and I see you have actually published science that we have a bit more faith in because it went to a journal and was accepted as a registered report, and I value that more, that has the potential to influence the industry.
Doesn't that system already exist? I mean, there are a handful of really prestigious journals which have high impact, and that.
But that doesn't necessarily make them good science.
No, absolutely not. But I think that there are people that regard the science that's published in those journals as being of a higher quality, even though it may not be true, and that is I think that is taken into consideration when people are looking at whether the finding of that particular study is true or not true, or reproducible or not reproducible. And I think that it hasn't made a fundamental difference. I think that you can put together a CV with a lot of second-tier journals if you're very, very productive and still accomplish much of your goals. Or, you can make an argument for a particular change in our understanding of a disease process by a whole lot of second-tier journal findings.
Yeah, I don't know. I still think there is an outside chance. I may not be the most likely scenario that 50 years from now we look back and say, hey, you remember when we used to just
publish anything,
write up articles and submit them to journals and they would accept them no matter what we did, and now we have to actually do things the right way and we register them ahead of time. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but I could, it's not impossible to me that given some time that we decide that, this whole industry is going in a direction we don't like and we change it slowly. My question is, how would we know if this was working? What would be the measure that we would say this actually improved science? Would it be that we would get a bunch of studies that replicated? Would it be that we got a bunch of studies that improved public health? I mean, what would that look like? I don't have the answer to that, but I think we got to figure that out if we're going to convince people to actually use this.
I mean, couldn't you approach this in much the same way that the meta-analysis people do, like using funnel plots to see if, like, studies that went through pre-registration like this, registered reports, have systematically different effect sizes or skewed effect size distributions, like.
Oh, you could, yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly what that would look like, but I suppose you could also look at, if you looked at, 10 years from now, you looked at meta-analyses of questions that there were some pre-registered studies and there were no other ones where there were none, and you look to see whether the publication bias measured by the funnel plot disappeared when there were registered reports on a particular topic. I suppose that would be some evidence to suggest it's actually working. Yeah. That's an interesting idea.
I don't know. I'm not convinced. I think that there's a lot of sort of hand-wringing about the peer review process right now. And everybody thinks that it's the best we have, but it's still woefully inadequate.
Yeah.
And that there are a lot of studies that get published in good journals that have gone through the peer review process that we have torn apart here, even high tier journals. So I don't understand why we would therefore expect that the same peer review process is going to vet the rigor of the research that is anticipated and spelled out in great detail ahead of time as being the gold standard and being acceptable.
No, I hear you on that one, Don. I don't think this is going to solve every problem. And one thing it's not going to solve is, there will still be some poorly designed studies that get through. Though I think it would improve things in the sense that it would, you'd be able to have a commitment to, only accepting things that, at least as far as they were described, you thought could legitimately answer the question. Now, all I have at the end of the process is I either have they did what they did, and it's flawed, or it's fundamentally flawed, or it's I'm willing to accept it, but there's nothing they can do about it most of the time after the fact. There's some analyses you can change and things like that, but often you can't fix it. Whereas this, I at least have the ability to give the input beforehand. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I don't think it would solve all the problems, but it would do is lead to the commitment to publish that result, regardless of whether or not we like the finding.
Right. We know that a certain fraction of these papers have been pre-vetted, and there will be no publication bias on this article.
Couldn't you say
that we know?
Couldn't you say, though, that as far as NIH-funded research, that we're essentially going through that process? Study section can be very, very rigorous, and all of us have had the experience where we've submitted a protocol for approval and funding from the NIH, and they basically just blow us out of the water, or they make us go through several iterations of changing the methodology. Isn't that somewhat similar? Similar process as to what's being suggested here?
Yeah, I do think there are some similarities, and I think that's part of the reason why probably this is taking off more in the psychological sciences than with epi, where the procedures for getting funding and the size of the studies and the complexity in some cases differ. That's not totally true universally. So yeah, to a certain extent, I would agree with that, but yet we certainly see lots of studies that we don't think are necessarily up to the rigor that they should be. More to the point, Don, I don't think that those review sections necessarily are signing off on your final analysis plan. And I think that was a lot of the issue that this approach was meant to deal with in the psychological sciences. It was experimental too, but a lot more around the analysis. All right. Well, so then answer this question then. Would you take the bet that there will be no, I'm not going to say any journal, but sort of, first, second, or, tiered journal within, sort of the medical fields that switch to a model of registered reports within the next 3 years?
So what's the bet? It's that they will or they won't?
That at least that we will have at least one journal in our world that will go this route within the next 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
How much?
$20.
I'll take it.
All right.
So what are you betting? Which way?
So I'm betting that there will be no journal in the medical realm or the public health realm that will take this on in the next 3 years.
Yep. You gonna take the bet?
I'm taking this bet.
I'm going to bet the other way, and
We have to have a counterparty.
I'm going to bet $20 that an epi journal does do this, and if I could put my nickel on top of the $20, that it would be the BMJ that would go for this.
And you're saying that they will accept no other publication but these.
Are we saying that, or that they will adopt this model?
Adopt this model for all publications in the journal.
Maybe all randomized controlled trials. Yeah, I could.
Well, let's be specific.
I'm going to say that they will adopt this for all RCTs, but I recognize that I'm being very optimistic here because I think I'm going to lose $20.05 here.
So we will
if
meet
the
back
BMJ
here.
But I
in
want to
3
be
years
optimistic.
does not adopt this, you owe me
trying to quell
$20.
our natural cynicism here.
So Matt, are you
Excellent.
in on this? You want some action?
I want some of this action, yeah, but I would not take the bet if it's within 3 years. It would be a journal that only goes this route. I think it would have to be the journal, opens up to this route. Mm-hmm. Don's not taking that bet.
Nickel
Matt,
on any journal in particular?
You got to have confidence in your convictions.
MJFE?
It's going to be the International Journal of Registered
Reproducible
Reports for
Results.
Epidemiology. All right, let's move on.
Can
let's
I
move on.
go first in this one?
You
because
can.
mine goes right off of this topic.
Okay.
It's super short.
So
It's actually
apparently
super short.
no introduction needed. Chris,
No
take it away.
introduction needed. So are any of you guys familiar with the scientist John McCool? McCool? This is a real person?
No, but I want that name.
Okay, it's good. It's up there with McLovin. If you ever see Superbad,
Yes.
it's an excellent movie, but inappropriate. So we should edit that out because I can't be endorsed on the radio. Anyway, it's an excellent movie. I use the McLovin driving license in a lot of my lectures.
Oh, what's the driving license?
Well, he has a fake driver's license to show that he's 21, and that's how he gets himself in with the cops.
Yep.
Anyway, so John McCool is a science reporter who is really irritated by predatory journals, and I think he's got a particular bee in his bonnet against a group called the MedCrave group. I kid you not, MedCrave. Like, I needed some science. And he had really pissed them off earlier because they had solicited him to write some stupid article in a journal that he's not a doctor. And he's not a scientist; he's a science writer. And so
the MedCrave group is a journal?
They're a predatory journal. There's a
It's
group
a
of
journal.
journals, but
Oh, it's a group of
they're basically predatory journals.
Okay.
And
All
so, but this had not really dissuaded them because despite him trying to troll them, they kept trolling him back with stupid spam emails. And so he finally got annoyed. He got asked to submit an article to the Journal of Urology and Nephrology Open Access, which is not one that I have worked with in the past. Now, he's not a nephrologist, nor a urologist, nor even a doctor. So he was irritated by this. So he decided to accept their offer. And he wrote an article over the weekend called, are you guys Seinfeld fans?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
The article called Uromycetitis Poisoning Results in Lower Urinary Tract Infection and Acute Renal Failure, a case report by physicians Martin von Nostrand, J. Riemenschneider, and Leonard Nicodemo, all of whom are characters from Seinfeld.
Wait, those are all Seinfeld's characters?
Those are all Seinfeld characters. Now,
what about what is it, Art Vandelay?
He might be in here.
What about George Costanza?
Oh, he's in here too. So he wrote this whole case report about the episode called The Parking Garage in Seinfeld, where Jerry Seinfeld needs to go to the bathroom because he can't find his car while he's in the parking garage. And so he decides to pee against a wall and is arrested. And he tries to get off by saying he has this disease called uromycetitis, that he has a license from the state of New York to pee wherever he wants, but he left the license at home and they don't buy it. And they arrest him anyway. And the whole thing is like this big farce, right? Yeah. And so he writes up exactly the plot of the episode. And submitted it. And
brilliant.
Drum roll, please.
It gets accepted.
It was accepted.
It was accepted. Almost immediately.
Oh, my God.
Within an hour, they wrote back saying, we think this is highly appropriate for our journal. And 3 days later, after a rigorous peer review, it was accepted with some minor formatting changes and requests that he include the lab values in the ER, which he made up. And
that is so good.
In the footnotes, of course, he lists like footnote number 1, Ryman Schneider J, Van Nostrum N, Costanza GL, as in the Journal of Advanced Urology. And he goes on to list a whole bunch of other people who were obvious Seinfeld folks. It was beautiful.
Oh God, I want to see that.
Yeah, so here's the actual article. I brought it in if you want a copy of it.
Oh, I do.
It's pretty funny.
Oh, that is
pretty funny. So well done, John McCool. Well done, McLovin.
Okay, so Chris, I'm gonna follow on, and I'm gonna make mine really quick because mine followed the exact same pattern, exact same logic. So we apparently were thinking of the same thing. Mine was back from the end of 2018. Retraction Watch has their list of biggest offenders of the year.
Oh yeah, this is where I found this, was on Retraction Watch.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it must have been the same idea, and they were one of their big ones from 2018. Number 6 was a paper that same idea, that the author wrote up put an article together. Didn't actually write it. He used SciGen. You know what SciGen is? This
is it like a bot?
It's a paper writing algorithm created by MIT that will just write the paper for you.
Random, just sort of random subjects.
No, I think it actually writes a paper for you. I mean, I haven't done it, but and so he wrote up this paper, submitted it to Drug Designing and Intellectual Properties International Journal. And in the title of the paper was Wanyan, Refinement of RPCS. So maybe it does just make stuff up. I have no idea.
Wanyan?
But what he did, Wanyan.
What's a Wanyan? What's a Wanyan?
It's like a Funyun.
I was going to say it's like a Funyun. It comes in a little like plastic bag. You buy it at the
corn chips.
at the bodega.
Okay, so now I'm Googling it to make sure it's not a dirty word.
Oh.
A word found only in the phrases with a Wanyan in the wanted.
What was that? Well, I missed it. Matt's laughing
those
now.
Who can't hear.
Matt's laughing.
is a paroxysm and unable to speak right now.
There's the silent Matt laugh.
A word.
Well, our listeners are going to just have to take it on faith that it's super funny.
No, it's not funny. It's just funny that I had to look it up.
So what
does
is
it mean anything?
What is a Wanyan?
A word found only in the phrases with a Wanyan in the wanton and wantons on you, generally interpreted to note some kind of imprecation. What does that mean?
I don't know. This sounds like Lewis Carroll.
With a vengeance, or a word of uncertain signification used only in phrases with a Wanyan, apparently equivalent to with a vengeance.
So what does a Wanyan mean?
I don't
Vengeance,
know.
I think.
I don't know.
Google
Something to do with Skeletor.
So
Google doesn't know all.
Google doesn't know all. So he wrote this up and he submitted it with the co-authors Satoshi Nakamoto, who is the
Bitcoin guy,
the inventor of Bitcoin, and Kim Kardashian.
Excellent.
And he submitted it, and of
She's
course,
a better scientist than us.
as you would expect, they accepted it. But that in and of itself, I don't find at all interesting or surprising because that happens all the time. But what I did like was that they interviewed the guy who wrote the paper or had the paper written. Retraction Watch did, and they said, our guess is few scientists have had the opportunity to work with Kim Kardashian. How did you end up collaborating? And he says, I've always thought that Kim's scientific talents were a bit underappreciated, so I wanted to give her the opportunity to show the unknown side of her. It was a very smooth and productive collaboration. Obviously, Kim's very busy, being a celebrity and all, so we never actually managed to meet in person, but she's been talking to me through her Instagram posts, and needless to say, the science presented in the paper would have never reached such high quality without her input.
Through her Instagram posts. I love it. That's great.
Yeah. So same idea, but well, that is the end of our program. If you got any feedback on this or any other episode, or you want to suggest a topic for us to take on, you can tweet us at PopHealthyX, or you can tweet me at ProfMattFox, or Chris at ID.Gill, or Don at DTheo1, or you can find us at the Population Health Exchange website at www.pophealthyx.org. We want to thank Leslie Talalian, Director of Lifelong Learning at BU School of Public Health, for supporting the podcast, and Nick Guler for everything that he does editing this thing.
Yay, Nick.
For the hours that he spends. Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you will download our next episode.